I'd like to welcome everybody to the Real Crusades History Podcast. My name is J. Stephen Roberts. I'll be your host. And our topic for today, we're actually starting a new series of podcasts. And the topic is going to be the Fourth Crusade, which I guess makes sense since not too long ago we did a series of podcasts about the Third Crusade that went on for quite a while. So now there's hours and hours and hours of academic discussion about the Third Crusade online that anybody who wants to listen to can take a listen. So we're now going to be jumping into the next major crusade in terms of the numbered crusades, and that is going to be the Fourth Crusade. So I'm here today with Real Crusades History contributor and member Rand Brown. Rand, how are you doing? Thanks for being here.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you as usual. And Rand and I are happy to welcome with us back for the second time. He was on a staff podcast not too long ago. Joe Vicinanzo. Joe, how are you doing today? Welcome.
Great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you back. And I know last time we had you on, we sort of had a Byzantine-themed podcast, and the Byzantine Empire is sort of a favored interest of yours, and so that makes sense that we're having you back for this discussion of the Fourth Crusade. So
trying to add a little balance here, I think.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here with us. But anyway, I also want to give a shout out to Paul Copenhagen, who was supposed to be on this podcast, but he's busy with a wedding this weekend. Not his own wedding, but he went to a wedding, so he will be with us for the second episode, but he's not with us today. So, Joe, Rand, and I are going to get this thing going. So, the Fourth Crusade, this is sort of the big controversial crusade, I guess we could say. I guess if we're going to focus in on just one of the numbered crusades as controversial, I guess the Fourth Crusade would really be it. I remember a while back there was a podcast on the Crusades where the hosts called the Fourth Crusade the least successful of all the Crusades. And I remember thinking, well, I mean, they did conquer something, which there's quite a few where
getting to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, but
Well, that's debatable. But where I was going with that is, in some respects, I do think that might actually make some sense, in that the Fourth Crusade, sort of the results of it are such a distortion, if you will, of the ideal of what the Crusades were meant to be. I mean, if we look at the beginning of the Crusades movement, it started with Pope Urban II and his diplomatic relationship with Alexius I Comnenus, and Pope Urban's original speeches, in terms of the sources we have for them, really emphasize the idea of taking help to Eastern Christendom. And so the Fourth Crusade kind of represents this enormous paradox. I mean, just over 100 years ago, we were setting out to bring aid to the East, to even bolster up the Byzantine Empire, and now suddenly the Byzantine Empire is being conquered by a crusade. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about the Fourth Crusade, and the thing that's probably often overlooked about it, is that there was this whole series of political issues involving both Byzantine politics and Latin politics, which really resulted in this. And so I think, guys, we're going to be able to explore some of that in this podcast. It's actually very interesting. I remember when I first got a chance to start looking really seriously at this, and a couple of scholars today who've written really well on the Fourth Crusade. Jonathan Phillips, for example, his book about the Fourth Crusade, which is really maybe the definitive book on the Fourth Crusade for sort of popular history currently. As I started looking at this, I realized how fascinating this political stuff going on that led up to the Fourth Crusade's results. It really is fascinating stuff. So we will hopefully be exploring some of that. So as we start off today, I wanted to just kind of look briefly at the interaction between the Latin and Byzantine world. As we've talked about in other podcasts, the experiences of the previous Crusades and the interaction between Byzantium and the West sort of, in some ways, the results of the Fourth Crusade can almost make sense if we look at if we kind of see, even if we just look at the First, Second, and Third Crusades, we can see almost this mounting tension, perhaps. If we look at the First and Second Crusade, the First Crusade, I think, really does represent a pretty clear-cut case of mostly cooperation between the Latins and the Byzantines. The First Crusade kind of resulted in Alexius Comnenus being able to sort of wrap up a lot of Asia Minor in the wake of the First Crusade. There was certainly considerable reconquests made by him as a result of that. There was some tension there. There were some things that happened, especially towards the end at Antioch, that kind of helped set Byzantium and the Latin West on this road towards perhaps more alienation. But by the time we get to the Third Crusade, there's just outright hostility between the two. Although coming more so from Byzantium, the big event of the Third Crusade, of course, was in terms of Byzantine and Latin interaction, was of course Frederick Barbarossa's campaign. But we'll jump into that in just a second. So Rand, I'm going to start with you. How would you say the Latin world at this time, if we're kind of looking at the eve of the Fourth Crusade, the turn of the 13th century, 1200? How do you think the Latin world sort of was viewing Byzantium at this time in general?
Unlike what could be said for the Eastern Roman world at that time, there was no sort of one homogeneous view that the Latin West had towards the Eastern Empire. And this was true really all throughout this period leading up to it. One of the things I always found really interesting is just, whenever you're talking about the relationships between the Latin West and the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman East, is you got to remember this. This cultural division goes way back before the Crusades. This goes all the way back to the division of the empire, the division of the old Roman Empire into East and West, and the fall of the Latin West, or the fall of the Western Empire to the barbarian successor kingdoms. Because the Byzantine Empire sees itself as the successor of the Roman world order, the guarantor, the heirs of the Caesars, and an order that goes all the way back, way back beyond the Middle Ages, there always was a discomfort there when dealing with the Western, the barbarian successor kingdoms to the Latin West, and with the West, believe it or not, for the most part, especially, and this goes all the way back to Charlemagne's time, they had a very exalted opinion of the emperors in Constantinople. Many of them tried to, in many ways, tried to emulate them. You even see that a little bit with Charlemagne during the Carolingian period. A lot of them tried to take on titles that were used in the Eastern Roman Empire. I just got done reading, not too long ago, William of Poitiers' account of Duke William of Normandy's invasion of England in 1066. And one of the things that whenever they mention the emperors in Constantinople, it's almost in this sort of mythical sacred aura, like they sort of saw them as like these very sacred mythical figures, who came from, symbolize a civilization and a world order that they were only that Latins in the West were only hoping to attain. But where you really see the break or the shift in Western attitudes towards the Byzantine Empire in the Middle Ages is right around the First Crusade.
Right.
I think what happens is now, granted, there were figures in the Latin West like the Italio-Normans, Robert Guiscard and Bowman and people like that, who obviously didn't have a terribly high opinion of the emperors in Constantinople, as the events at Dyrrhachium showed, and Guiscard's campaigns throughout Thessaly and places like that. But that was a very isolated attitude. It's when you see all these other leaders from the Latin West show up in Constantinople and get sort of exposed to the no pun intended, but Byzantine political machinations that they encounter with Alexius and his government, that you kind of almost see this like disillusionment occur, especially right around the events of the Siege of Antioch, where Tatikius and the Byzantine support that they had up to that point basically just disappears. And although there's an argument to be made about what exactly motivated them to do that, to many of the Latin leaders of the First Crusade, it looked like they'd just been sold out by the Eastern Roman Empire. And so you definitely get the sense that there's this disillusionment that occurs with many of the Latin Westerners who then come out to try and get involved with the reclaiming of Jerusalem and winning back the Levant. And it's you even see that in just the language from the primary sources at that time. Whereas before they were speaking about the emperors of Constantinople as like these mythical sacred figures, you kind of start to see that go away.
And also, what about, especially once we get to a point like the beginning of the 13th century? I mean, at this point, at this point, the Latin West has grown up so much. I mean,
it has.
It's and Byzantium has changed a lot too in that time.
It has, and I think what you're seeing by the time that the Fourth Crusade is beginning to become a thing, there is no more. In the Latin West, there is no more of an attitude of that there's anything really special, really terribly special about the emperors in Constantinople.
Except their money.
Yeah, except their money.
Which even at this point, that's not that impressive. I mean,
well, and notice
that's the thing.
Notice that the leaders of the Fourth Crusade, the first people they go to talk to are no longer. It's no longer the emperors in Constantinople who they want to go talk to. They want to go talk to Venice and the Italian and the burgeoning mercantile Italian city-states. That's where like the money's at now. At least as far as the Latin West is concerned. So I think there even that shows that there was that those in the Latin West were looking for different people and different places they could go to for support in crusading other than Constantinople. In fact, before you get the whole thing with the Angeloi involved and everything like that, you really don't even, at least as far as like Geoffrey of Villehardouin is concerned in his chronicle, Constantinople wasn't even going to be a factor.
Right, yeah. And there had been kind of a tendency to try to avoid that route anyway, just because the land route was so difficult.
Exactly. Well, and it makes sense because of the experience of which would have just been 20 years, or not even 20 years prior, with Frederick Barbarossa in the Third Crusade. Going through. I think a lot of the Crusader leaders for the Fourth Crusade were like, you know what? Let's just bypass. Let's just leave the Eastern Roman Empire out of this as a whole.
Plus, the goal is Egypt, which is not really within the Eastern Roman sphere of influence. So,
Right. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary, Rand, of kind of how the attitudes had changed in the Latin world about Byzantium. So Joe, at this time, if we look at the Byzantine Empire at the same period, the dawn of the 13th century, how do you think they are viewing the Latin West at this point? As general a question as that is, probably too general, but what do you think?
it is a big question, but and it's a very complex one too. I don't think just as there isn't one Latin view of the East, there's no one Roman or Byzantine view of the West. For one thing, the Byzantine nobility, the Roman nobility at this time, had intermarried so closely over the past 100 years with the Latins, particularly crusading Latins, that they actually had quite a bit of familiarity with Western cultural norms. Like they were not strangers the way they had been when Bohemond showed up at the court of Alexius the First. For like Manuel the First, Manuel the First Comnenus, he married first a German wife, and then the daughter of the Prince of Antioch. So his children were all themselves half Latin. Boniface of Montferrat, the leader of the Fourth Crusade, both of his brothers had been Caesar. Renier had been Caesar John. He had married Maria Comnena, and he was the son-in-law, of course, of Manuel I, and was basically second in command until he was killed by Andronicus. And then Conrad, his Boniface's older brother, had actually also married an Angelina, and had himself been named Caesar before basically taking over rule of Jerusalem right before the Third Crusade. So, I mean, there was a lot of there's quite a big connection there. But the general view, of course, would be that these guys coming from the West, they're definitely good at fighting, not necessarily as sophisticated as the Byzantine court, as the court of Constantinople. There's certainly nothing to rival Constantinople in Western Europe at the time, in terms of wealth, in terms of just the grandeur of the city, the kind of the continuity of the historical tradition. This is a new civilization that's rising in the West on the bones of an old one, sure, but definitely a new civilization, much more dynamic than Byzantine civilization at this time, and much more. Well, I guess dynamic would be the word. It's constantly reaching out, touching other things, trying to bring new experiences, new areas into its fold, where basically Byzantium is just basically trying to keep things together, hold everything together, keep things the same. So view them essentially as less sophisticated, but dangerous, but basically cousins, kind of like junior cousins.
Yeah, I think the Byzantine world had become so embroiled in Latin politics in the Latin world at this time. I mean, just the fact that you've got, kind of like you're saying, Joe, you've got Byzantine empresses who are, 100% Latin or
All
that kind of thing. Yeah, really, at this period. So it's interesting. I mean, and it does seem like that closeness actually is partly what leads to the results of the Fourth Crusade. I did want to kind of touch on the Third Crusade just a little bit more. This issue with the experience of the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade is interesting just because the Byzantine emperor at the time, Isaac II Angelos, he adopts an outright hostile attitude towards the Latins. He basically throws his cause in with Saladin. And it's very weird because it doesn't seem to gain him or the Byzantine Empire very much. It kind of makes you wonder why he chose to do something like that. And essentially,
that'd be Isaac who
right.
actually makes that treaty with Saladin.
Right. Yeah. And essentially, Saladin. It's not like Saladin is sending a bunch of troops to Isaac or something. Basically, Saladin gains everything from it, and Isaac just gets his empire destroyed by by a Latin army. But yeah, Frederick Barbarossa basically has to conquer the Byzantine Empire really to move through it. And he
to begin with, though. That's why the
I'm sorry, what was that, Joe?
Oh, sorry. Not to interrupt, but that was the reason why the alliance was made with Saladin in the first place, because Barbarossa was coming overland, and his stated goal was to dominate the Byzantine Empire. His whole he wanted German predominance throughout Europe, over the papacy, over the East. He was not a friend to the Byzantines to start with. I mean, Isaac felt that this was necessary to prevent this other barbarian, this Frederick Barbarossa, this guy who'd been rampaging around Europe, just causing troubles with everybody for the past 40 years. To him, to Isaac, this wasn't so much a religious thing. Making an alliance with Saladin and the war against Saladin was not necessarily a holy war in the Byzantine view. It was a political thing, and Frederick's motivations, as far as were concerned, were political.
I don't think there's any evidence that Frederick. I don't think there was any evidence that Frederick wanted to conquer the Byzantine Empire. I mean, he
dominate.
Well, he wanted to pass through it, just like he wanted to pass through.
There was always a degree of tension between the Holy Roman emperors and the Eastern and the emperors in Constantinople, even before the Crusades. You even see a little bit of that even during Charlemagne's time, because there was this attitude of, well, we're the Holy Roman emperors now, we should be the ones who take priority over these guys over in Constantinople. And it never really came out until you saw sort of the two meet each other for the first time, which was with Frederick Barbarossa and the Third Crusade.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're talking specifically about this, though, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that, perhaps Frederick Barbarossa thought he should be the universal emperor or something like that. But in terms of his actual policies during the Third Crusade, I don't see any evidence that he was trying to conquer the Byzantine Empire.
No.
I mean, it almost sounds to me like that's what Joe is saying.
Not to say that conquer exactly, but to make himself preeminent in the region, and that would mean reducing the Byzantine Empire, which
I just don't know where you're getting at, Joe. I really don't. He sent a bunch of messages to Isaac saying he wanted to pass through the Byzantine Empire, but Frederick was very much intent on getting to Palestine, and he understood that if he was going, and he sent the same sort of letters to the Sultan of Rome. Mm-hmm. I mean, the idea was, okay, he wanted to end his life in Palestine. I mean, I think if you look at the German primary sources, it's just pretty clear that there was no hostile intention towards Byzantium. Now, I understand if Isaac didn't believe that, possibly, mm-hmm. but it just it seemed kind of silly on his part.
Yeah, I would say that's where the real. It wasn't so much a one party trying to dominate the other. It was more sort of a lost in translation scenario where, I think there were some very volatile personalities involved in that, and that just escalated the tensions rapidly and on both sides, and so you saw that collapse in relations and dealing with one another, to where you have Emperor Isaac actually reaching out to Saladin to preserve what he felt. To preserve himself against what he felt was this external threat in the person of Emperor Frederick.
I think Isaac, though, the Byzantine sources themselves identify Isaac as kind of a buffoon. I mean, he was sort of one of the great, sort of one of the poor emperors of history, and his policies were probably just hasty and not very well thought out towards the Latins.
Yeah, I should clarify. I'm not trying to say that he was actually trying to take over, take over the Roman Empire and establish himself as the sole ruler, but he certainly did like the idea of being like at the top of the heap in Europe, and had plenty of conflicts with the Byzantines in southern Italy and with Sicilian relationships and dealings with the Hungarians, which makes it a little bit more understandable that Isaac and the Byzantines would view his decision to pass through their territory with a massive army with a little bit of suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that,
Right.
that was always the issue for the Byzantines, is if you're moving a huge army through our territory, that in itself is kind of threatening.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I do think, emperors like Manuel Comnenus and Alexius Comnenus obviously handled it better than Isaac II Angelos. But part of the reason Isaac behaved the way he did was because of the instability of the empire at the time brought about by the Angeloi. Anyway, Isaac himself didn't necessarily feel secure on his throne. So anyway, not to send us off on too great a tangent with the Third Crusade there, but anyway, it's just kind of an interesting episode in that we sort of see right before the Fourth Crusade this sort of total breakdown of the relationship, if we want to put it that way. So let's kind of take a look now at what's going on in the Latin world. As the Third Crusade, that era comes to an end. The election of Pope Innocent III in 1198 has a lot to do with the direction that the Crusades movement is going to go. I think you guys probably both would agree. Pope Innocent III was certainly one of the most ambitious, intelligent, broad-minded men to ascend the throne of Saint Peter. And the interesting thing about Innocent is he is a pope who, in many ways, is shaped by this, this Latin culture that's been so heavily formed by this experience of a century of crusading. The Crusades are now sort of, it's not like, in Pope Urban's time when he was innovating this thing. The Crusades are now a central feature of Latin consciousness. And Pope Innocent III views this mission, this idea of retaking the Holy Land and expanding Christendom in that direction, both reconquering and expanding, as he views this as a central focus of his papacy, and he views it as really an imperative. It's no longer just this idea of, okay, well, this is a good cause to take up, please take up this vow. It's like, no, he views this as something that the Latin world must do, that Latin nobility who refuse to be a part of this, or who would perhaps fail to take up this cause, this would be almost like an indictment against them. So Innocent begins planning another crusade really pretty much as soon as he becomes pope. Initially, it seemed like he was going to plan almost more of a quick follow-up to the Crusade of 1197, which was, or also known as the German Crusade, which this was almost a follow-up to the Third Crusade, where a Latin army retook a couple more of coastal cities, Beirut and Sidon in particular, but that there was actually a treaty between Al-Adil, who was Saladin's brother and successor, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which was going to be a 5-year peace treaty, which caused Innocent to switch his planning over to more of a long-term crusade, more of a large-scale, long-term effort to retake the Holy Land. And of course, when we say retake the Holy Land, Innocent and the Latin world in general was kind of viewing the next step was going to be a campaign against Egypt. And again, this is sort of a legacy of the Third Crusade.
Mm-hmm.
Richard the Lionheart, towards the end of the Third Crusade, as he was kind of rolling up his campaign on the coast, seems to have come to this idea that he himself wanted to lead an invasion to Egypt at some point. And of course, that idea was not new to him. the Latins in the Kingdom of Jerusalem had been looking towards trying to get as much of Egypt under their control as possible. So really early on, the Fourth Crusade seemed to have been destined to go to Egypt. So Rand, could you tell me, in your opinion, why was Egypt so important as a target for the Crusaders?
Well, at the time, with the Ayyubid Sultanate, initially established by Salahuddin, Egypt was the real source of Ayyubid power, in both military terms and economic. That was their home territory. And Egypt at that time was an incredibly prosperous place. It benefited from both maritime trade and also just internal resources within the interior of the country. It was very heavily populated, especially down the Nile Valley. The resources that the Ayyubid Sultanate could rely on there were vast. And so that's where, in military terms, Egypt was the Ayyubid center of gravity. That was where their real power was. And the Crusaders, as you said, recognized that a long time ago. Even clear back into the days of Baldwin III and people like that. That they recognized very early on that was where the real source of their opponent's power came from. And so, Richard, it's not surprising that a military leader of Richard's caliber would have been drawing up plans for taking that center of gravity out, or at least denying the Ayyubid forces within Palestine access to those resources and those reinforcements. So that's where you see Richard constantly focusing on the Gaza sort of the Gaza Strip area and things like that, because that was the lifeline. Latin maritime dominance pretty much had naval superiority in the Eastern Mediterranean, so they didn't really have to worry about Egyptian maritime supply and maritime activity, and especially since Richard recaptured all the major port cities there along the Palestinian coast. So the Ayyubids were already cut off from the sea in Palestine. Now they just needed to cut them off from the land connection to Egypt, and pretty much the Ayyubid forces within the Levant, their fate would have been sealed. So I think what the Fourth Crusade was initially wanting to do, as far as Egypt, was sort of the same plan that you're going to see later under King St. Louis' Crusades, where they're going to essentially try to open up a second front in the Crusades. They're going to try and take away. They're going to try and move the focus of the fighting away from Palestine, where it's just sort of grinding down into a stalemate, and they're gonna apply pressure on a much more vital point for the Ayyubids that will hopefully shift the conflict in the Latins' favor, and split the Egyptian forces and force them to pull forces out of Palestine in order to respond to the very real, the much more intense threat to their Egyptian homeland. That is what you're essentially seeing is sort of the attacking the soft underbelly of the Ayyubid Sultanate, and really applying the pressure where they're going to feel it, which isn't in Palestine at this point, and to hopefully then tip the balance of the conflict's favor towards the Latins in Palestine.
Yeah, so I think this idea of shifting the focus toward Egypt was the right one. I mean, it seems to be. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the beginning of the taking of the cross, and some of the guys who ended up being at the top of this thing. So there was a tournament held in November of 1199 by Theobald III of Champagne, and this is where a lot of the initial cross-taking took place, where a lot of the leadership was established. Originally, Theobald III was going to be the military commander of the crusade. His cousin Louis of Blois also took the cross. Simon of Montfort took the cross, and then a couple months later, Baldwin IX of Flanders is going to take the cross. So really, this is gearing up to be a heavily French campaign. And the interesting thing too about the Fourth Crusade and the men who emerged at the top of it, we have no kings at the top of this crusade. So this is kind of different from the Second Crusade and the Third Crusade, where we had some of Europe's most important kings leading the thing. Well, at this point, we're almost going back to the way things had been done during the First Crusade, which is we have some of the important counts and dukes who are going to be at the top of this thing. So, Rand, I know this is something you and I have just discussed before. How do you think the High Council of the Fourth Crusade functioned? Do you think they functioned well together? Do you think this compares to the First Crusade?
I would say initially, I would say they actually worked even better with each other than the First Crusade did initially. When the First Crusade all came together, like we've mentioned before, this was a very new thing. Crusading was a very new thing. At least to the vast, at least to all the Latins outside of Spain. This was a very new phenomenon, and I think there was a lot of initially, and you see this in the sources of the First Crusade. There was some there were some personality conflicts, and there were even some conflicts that went along ethnic lines. Amongst some of the contingents there. With this one, if you look, Geoffrey of Villehardouin gives you in his chronicle, he basically gives you this massive roll call of who all's involved, and they're all for the most part, they're all pretty much from France. With a few rare exceptions. So, these are all guys who they were all colleagues of one another. They all knew each other. They all, maybe there were some, petty rivalries going on, but they, for the most part, when they all came together under Thibault of Champagne's leadership, sort of overall leadership, there's a lot of cordiality. And you get that from the primary sources. You get that there was that they all saw each other in friendly terms, and were willing to go out and make this thing happen. Where you start to see the friction occur is right out the gate, right as people are taking the cross and money's being raised and armies are starting to shift and move towards the muster points in Italy. You have two very high profile deaths amongst the Crusader leadership. The first and foremost is Thibault of Champagne himself. He takes ill and he dies before he can even get out of France. And it's even Geoffrey of Villehardouin makes a very big deal about this, that the Crusader leadership was dismayed when they heard about his death. And that you got the feeling that Thibault was one of these guys who really was sort of the linchpin, or at least one of the very key figures amongst this group, sort of keeping everyone together. And then right after he dies, you have Count Geoffrey of Perche die. And so right out the gate, you've got these two very high profile leaders who up and die before the Crusade is even off the ground in Europe. And that's where you start to see some of these barons and some of these lesser nobles sort of kind of go off on their own program. And you see Geoffrey talks about some who, instead of meeting at Venice like they were all supposed to, they go take off down to Apulia. I believe that's how you say that. Apulia. Southern Italy. They go take off to Southern Italy to go depart on their own, for Egypt or for the Holy Land. and Joffrey kind of really makes a stink
Right.
about it, because it's like, well, we were all supposed to gather at Venice because we were all going to pool our resources to purchase our fleet. Well, now we've got all these guys going off on their own program and leaving out of southern Italy, and they're not there to pay for their share of constructing the fleet, and he sort of blames them. And whether or not this was totally accurate, because you do have to remember that Joffrey of Villehardouin was among the top tier leadership. He was the envoy of the Fourth Crusade leadership. So maybe there's a little bit of apology going on in his account, but you definitely get the sense that these guys who sort of, after the death of Tybalt and Joffrey, sort of take off and go off on their own program, did sort of screw everyone else over, and leaves the Crusaders in Venice with the situation of being 30,000 marks in debt to the Venetians, and and so now they're desperately trying to come up with ways to pay the difference, which essentially, that is really what kickstarts the Fourth Crusade as we know it, is the Crusader leadership trying to figure out how in the hell they're going to pay what they owe.
How they're going to pay the Italians.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurial Italians, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good place for us to jump into. We just talked about the death of Theobald III of Champagne, the problems that created. The next person who's going to be approached to take up this role of military commander is going to be Boniface I of Montferrat, who was an experienced military leader already with some connections to the Eastern world and some connections with the Byzantine nobility. So Joe, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that. So how was Boniface connected to the Byzantine world, and how do you think that impacted the course of things?
Yeah, well, Boniface is actually a really fascinating guy, very cosmopolitan, very well-educated, excellent military leader, just recognized throughout Europe as kind of one of the premier figures of the nobility. He was very well connected to both the Holy Roman and Eastern Roman courts. He was first cousins with Philip of Swabia, the king of Germany at the time, the descended from Barbarossa, and his younger brother, Rainier, had actually been married to the daughter of Manuel I, Comnenus. Rainier had actually been killed along with his wife by Andronicus about 17 years before they started organizing the Fourth Crusade. So there may have been a little bit of resentment there to certainly to the Angeli among the Montferrats. His older brother, Conrad of Montferrat, was also married to a Byzantine princess, the sister of Isaac Angelus. So, and Philip of Swabia, of course, his cousin, the king of Germany, was married to the daughter of Isaac Angelus. So the fact that Isaac Angelus had been deposed by his brother might have been personal for Boniface, considering that he had more than one family ties to Isaac Angelus, and may have felt some sort of familial obligation towards the man. The son, Alexius the Third, the son of Isaac Angelus, was hanging out essentially in Germany with his sister, the wife of the king of Germany. So Boniface, he had traveled extensively throughout the Mediterranean, throughout Germany, throughout Western Europe, and throughout the East. He had visited many places throughout the East, and was ideally suited, I think, to be the leader of the Fourth Crusade, given all his connections throughout Europe, throughout the Levant, and his military experience. speaking of that, he's kind of a romantic figure as well. He had this troubadour, famous medieval troubadour, a guy named Rambo, spelled a little bit more, French than it looks. It looks like Raimbaut, Raimbaut, de Vicaris, who was a member of his court. He wrote all these romantic jests about Boniface, and in fact became a knight serving under Boniface during the Fourth Crusade and later on. So Boniface, interesting guy, and I think definitely had a bone to pick with Alexius III, who is currently sitting on the throne of Constantinople. A lot more sympathy for his relative, his in-law, essentially his in-law Alexius IV, the son of Isaac, the deposed emperor.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've got here the guy who's going to be at the head of the military command of the Fourth Crusade. He is so deeply connected to the Byzantine world, to a couple of Byzantine royal families, really. And so what happens is Boniface takes the cross in the summer of 1201. He then attends Christmas court, like you were saying, with his cousin Philip of Swabia. And as you mentioned, Joe, Alexius Angelos, who, is going to be the future Alexius IV, we don't know that yet, but the son of Alexius III. There's way too many Alexiuses in this Fourth Crusade, by the way.
Sorry, nephew of Alexius III, son of Isaac the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's you're absolutely correct.
There's way too many Alexii.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's correct. The son of Isaac. Yeah, and the nephew of Alexius III. Because Alexius III was the one who was currently on the throne in Constantinople. So he's this younger Alexius, future Alexius IV, he's hanging around Philip of Swabia's court.
Because his sister is the queen.
Yes, exactly. His sister's the queen. And Boniface is going to be there at the Christmas court. I think one of the fascinating questions about the Fourth Crusade, and it frequently comes up, is, was this diversion planned? Was there some secret plot behind the scenes to actually take the crusade to Constantinople? There was never any intention, really, of going to Egypt. So what do you think, Joe? Do you think that, this is kind of a speculative question, but do you think it's possible that, Boniface and Alexius could have been talking about this as far back as the Christmas court of 1201?
It's certainly possible. I don't believe that this was a conspiracy. I don't believe that they actually were planning to go to Constantinople rather than Egypt. But I don't think that they necessarily minded so much. And I can see how they would have thought that this could be an ancillary goal, something that it would be nice to have the support of the Byzantine Empire in the Crusade, and they were probably more likely to get it with Alexius IV, the son of the deposed emperor, taking the throne rather than his uncle Alexius III remaining on the throne. So there may have been some ideas, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was their goal the whole time to get to Constantinople.
Yeah. So as we're kind of closing off today, we'll just sort of talk about this deal that's negotiated in Venice. So representatives of the French counts, really led by Geoffrey de Villehardouin, they're going to be the ones who negotiate this deal in Venice. This happens in February of 1201. The proposal is made to the Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo. For a price of 85,000 marks, Venice will transport 4,500 knights and horses, 9,000 squires, and 20,000 foot soldiers to Egypt. So this is apparently just an enormous number. The big thing that always comes up is that this was an overshooting, an overestimation of what they were actually going to get. So I just want to let you get, if you guys want to kind of add some brief comments on this deal that's come up with in Venice. At this point, the Doge of Venice enters in as a player. Who wants to go first on that? I'll leave it up to you guys.
I'll go ahead and jump in here real quick because
go for it.
Something that I think that the details of that deal get a lot of attention, especially especially from people like Geoffrey of Villehardouin. in his chronicle. And at least according to Joffrey, the Venetians actually supply what they said they were going to. They actually are able to construct this fleet that's going to take everybody. Where Joffrey really highlights or at least the source of the tension, according to people like Joffrey, were that people, some of these other barons and nobles that were supposed to meet in Venice don't. And they take off and they go out of ports, other various ports in Italy.
Yeah, other ports. That's the big phrase that keeps coming up in Geoffrey de Verduin.
Yeah, and he, he fingers that as the cause of the financial shortfall on the part of the Crusaders, and that they're not able to raise enough money to pay what they owe the Venetians. And it's very interesting to see the back and forth between the Crusader leaders and Doge Dandolo and the Italians and the other Venetians is there's a very interesting. It's almost like who's trying to, in looking after their own self-interest, who's trying to out Crusader the other. And they have these very public displays of Doge Dandolo is giving these very impassioned speeches from the pulpit in St. Mark's about the importance of the Crusader cause and winning back Jerusalem, and how we want to be a part of this, and then the Crusader leaders are coming back and they're giving these very impassioned speeches calling on the Venetians to hey, come do your part for making the reconquest of Jerusalem happen, and all this kind of thing. And you can tell that it's almost kind of like a public contest of words with each other, in that you can definitely tell there were probably some much more straightforward and much less passionate or much less idealistic conversations going on behind the scenes.
This was an existential matter for Venice. They basically turned their entire city was devoted to making over 400 ships over the course of a year and a half, on the promise that they would be paid for these ships. There was only about 80,000 people in Venice, and they were planning on sending about 15,000 soldiers and sailors along with the Crusaders in these ships. 15,000 adult males out of a population of 90,000 people. This is what Venice was going to do as a city for the next next years. They couldn't afford to not have the Crusaders pay them.
Yeah, and you get that even from the the Crusader chroniclers, is that there was no way that the Venetians were just gonna not get paid for this. That was off the table. And it's no surprise then that I think, and I don't, I disagree with the attitude that Enrico Dandolo was some sort of scheming, kind of sinister, figure who hijacks a crusade, for his own purposes and stuff like that. I really don't subscribe to that. I think that's a little too simplistic. I think what he was trying to do was, let's come up with a solution that works for both of us, and then we'll go from there. And so that's where you see the suggestion that, well, hey, we just lost one of our overseas colonies across the Adriatic in Zara. We just lost that. Can you help us take that back? And
although they didn't take it recently in the first place, so
yeah, and we will.
It's such a moral, right to that.
Well, I mean, but as far as he's concerned, yeah, they do have a right to it, and they would like it back. And here's this massive Crusader army, sitting in their city that owes them money. So I think it's sort of a, hey, look, if you help us, we'll see what we can do about your debt to us, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
And that's where, you really see the Crusader, the people who are in the Crusades. That's where you really see a division occur, because now we're talking about we're not even in the Holy Land yet, and now we're going to be fighting against not only fellow Christians, but for the most part, the city of Zara had been taken from the Venetians by the King of Hungary, by the Catholic King of Hungary, who had actually pledged his support to the Crusade just a year prior. So you see you really see the line get split right down the middle of the leadership of the Fourth Crusade. You see the papal legate, the Cistercian papal legate, comes out and just flat out says, "You guys can't do this." You see people like Simon de Montfort, the elder, leave and protest and abandon the crusade. Of course, we'll see him again in the Albigensian Crusades. I think it really the prospect really bothered a lot of people. But then the other side of the Crusader leadership realized they didn't have a choice, in that the Venetians were not going to just let them go with still 30,000 marks, unpaid. That too much money and too much time had been invested on both sides in producing this fleet, and so now it's either we use this and okay, fine, maybe we help out the Venetians a little bit and then we can go, but either way we have to do this. It's there's no third option from where the Crusaders are sitting at this point.
Yeah, good comments. So Joe, do you have any final thoughts on this?
I'd say that I'm not quite so I don't have quite as high opinion of Dandolo's character. I do think that he was motivated to a certain degree by commercial interests and by revenge for the massacre of the Latins. Even before that, for the confiscation of Venetian property in 1171, when he himself was an emissary to the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, and may, at least according to the Russians, later on, he had actually been blinded. Certainly, he was blind by the time of the Fourth Crusade, 30 years later. But he may have. I do think that he may have had some a bone to pick.
Oh, I would agree with that absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't trying to make an apology for Dandolo, but what I more take issue with is the sort of the more conspiratorial view that sees him as having deliberately hijacked a crusade for his for selfish purposes. I think that's it's a little cartoonish, it's a little simplistic, but motivated by commercial interests, absolutely. I mean, that was Venice's lifeblood. I mean, Venice wouldn't have existed as a city-state had it not been for the burgeoning mercantilism that Italy was beginning to experience as a whole at that time. And so, that was absolutely one. In fact, that was the reason why they wanted Zara back. Zara was a very critical trading post for them. And they had just lost it, to the Hungarians. So, and also I do give some credence to the fact that there was some personal hard feelings there, that, especially if the story is true, that Dandolo himself as a younger man was even involved with the massacre of the Latins, and was possibly even personally injured in that. I think there maybe would have been some, and we've seen throughout the whole history of the Crusades that there has never been there were never very good relationships between Latins from Italy and the Byzantines. And we see that going clear back to Robert Guiscard and the Italo-Normans and and Bohemond and all that, and the Sicilian kings and things like that. That there was of all the Latin West, the Italians, the Italian Latins seem to be the ones that always kind of had an issue with the Eastern Roman Empire. In one way, shape, or form. So,
well, I think in our next episode we can kind of explore a little bit deeper, sort of the details of this diversion to Zara, and that's where we're going to go next time.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been a really fascinating first episode, and I really appreciate both of you being here, and you both had some really good comments. So I'm excited. I think we've got some interesting discussions in store for us. So I'm going to go ahead and say right now, Rand, thanks for being here as always, my brother.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And Joe, it's really good to have you back, and I'm glad you're going to be with us for a while on this podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So this is Real Crusades History signing out for now. I'm J. Stephen Roberts, your host as ever. You can find us at realcrusadeshistory.com. And we release something new, either a video or podcast every Monday. So thanks. My new book, Why Does the Heathen Rage? A novel of the Crusades set during the reign of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, is now available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. Please click on the link in the About box of this video to get your copy. Also, if you would like to support Real Crusades History by offering a donation, you will find a PayPal donate link in the About box of this video. Thank you.